Hello there. Welcome to the Nemeth Report podcast. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth, energy historian, analyst, consultant, and I'll be your host. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Dan McTeague joining us. Dan is the legendary gas wizard, former Liberal MP, and president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. We're going to be talking about Canada's EV mandate, which is coming into effect in January 2026. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the program.
Tammy, great to be here, and thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, you've been a vocal critic of government overreach in energy policy for some time now and a real staunch advocate for affordable, practical solutions. Before we dive into this conversation around net zero and the EV mandate, I'm wondering if you can just take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you for that. Dan McTeague. I've been around for a little while, served 18 years as a Liberal member of Parliament. Prior to that, media relations for a tiny little automotive company. It's called Toyota Canada. And prior to that, a little bit of work in the Royal Bank and a lot of work in the trenches in the Liberal Party. I must say, campaign manager for people like former MP Derek Lee, Housing Minister for Ontario Alvin Curling. My work in the party goes back to 1978. 74, I was licking stamps and doing other fun things as a 14-year-old in Hugh Faulkner's campaign in Peterborough. But I was quite young and just learning the ropes back then and meeting a lot of folks that I thought were very interesting at the time. Obviously, I'd fallen into the area of the Liberal Party only because I thought having a French mother, Irish, Scottish father from Peterborough kind of allowed me to sort of figure out which part of the political spectrum I found myself in, always the center. And of course, very comfortable with that over the years as member of Parliament, working on consumer files, working on the foreign affairs files, and very happy with everything that took place for those 18 years up till 2011, when I had to rediscover myself and to work on areas that I was very comfortable with, helping people manage their budgets, especially when it came to gas price prediction. But it didn't just end there. It also allowed me some work in policy, not just in Canada, but in the United States. And so today, here we are, many years later, putting a lot of that experience, public experience and private sector experience, to good work and to good use in terms of pointing out, some of the policies that are being driven by Ottawa in particular, but accepted by others at a time in which the world seems to be gripped with a number of very interesting narratives, many of them not very well suited to Canada. And I would actually make the argument very dangerous for Canada, including, of course, net zero.
Right. And, one of the central components of net zero is, if we could just explain a little bit, net zero is to have net zero CO2 greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And a lot of the Western countries have these net zero policies where it's to phase out emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, primarily CO2, in a gradual way until at 2050 it's net zero. And a prime component of that is electric vehicles. And in the UK, where I live, they've brought in an EV mandate where they tell manufacturers they must sell X percentage of EV vehicles. Otherwise, if they don't, they pay like a significant penalty of like £15,000 per vehicle. I mean, it's insane. But Canada's EV mandate is requiring that by 2035, every new light duty vehicle sold must be zero emission. And so the interim targets are 20% of all new vehicles next year in Canada must be electric. And my understanding is that this doesn't necessarily include hybrids unless they're plug-in hybrids. So from your perspective as the gas wizard, why do you see this as a sort of direct threat to the freedom of choice for average Canadians?
Well, freedom of choice and eclipsing of actually any reason or rationale behind it. And I think most manufacturers are now starting to come very quickly to the reality that despite massive amounts of public subsidies, called a grift, they're not prepared to invest in it. Why? Because you can't, when as a proposal for anything that you want to shift or change, it requires government to subsidize to build, government to subsidize to create infrastructure, and subsidize in order to buy. It doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense. It looks like, one of the 1930s 5-year plans of the Communist Party. And it does not suggest to me in any way, shape, or form that the great take-up is there. It's predicated on the idea that, of course, CO2 is bad to humanity. Funny, I don't see that being a problem when it comes to growing things, but I won't go down that particular argument right now, because I think what we're seeing here is people using a flimsy scientific argument to make the absurd conclusion that we can somehow transform transportation, despite the efficiencies of internal combustion engines as they've evolved over the past 120, 130 years, while at the same time demonizing and then suggesting that perhaps electric vehicles are the way ahead. They are not. They cannot be. And there are many, of course, variations to the kind of transportation grid in the future that we will see in this country and around the world. And they don't include lithium-ion battery. There are many others, salt batteries from China. And I'll talk about China in just a moment. Of course, other factors like solid-state batteries. And of course, ever-improving efficiency from internal combustion engines. You know, what 20 years ago took a 5.3 or 5.7 liter engine to move a truck can be done on a 4-cylinder now. It's how you work the technology. And so I think that's where the world is. And for a country like Canada, cold as it is, the last thing you want to do is leave your battery out anytime for more than a couple of hours, because you know how good it's going to work, especially a country like ours, which very much thrives on its resource base. Not that the previous government really spent a lot of time worrying about that.
Yeah, it's funny because I was looking at the website that the Canadian government has for the zero emission vehicle sales targets and its policy for 2030 and whatnot. And it's hilarious because it says, oh, people complain that it's not going to work for a cold climate like Canada, but actually it's okay. The batteries will be fine. But there was a case of a guy in Saskatchewan who was really upset because he'd bought one of the Mini Cooper EV cars, and then said, "Why didn't you tell me this wasn't going to work in -40?" And it's like, okay, so where are they getting this information from that these batteries will work in a -40 prairie winter? And even if it does work, it'll work for maybe 20 minutes before, you can't have the heat on, you can't do all these different things, which then puts actually citizens in danger, because if you're in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan and your car stops working, there's you'll be stranded, and it's not necessarily a good thing for the public. So I thought that was really interesting that they were trying to make the case that these batteries were fine for the Canadian harsh winter.
Well, I suppose the batteries work well when they catch fire in an accident, of course, burn at a much higher level, and first responders have to come at them. But they're heavy. I know I had a vehicle the other day that I had to have towed because the battery had gone out, ironically. It took me, about $140 to get fixed. But the person said, I wish this was an EV. It was a hybrid. He said, because I'd be making double the money. I'd make $600-700 a tow. They go to a lot of accidents where these things are there. They use a lot more tires. They're expensive to drive. And I'm not taking away from the idea that everybody should not have the choice of doing that. But listen, don't ask other people to pay for it. You want to buy something that is less than up to efficiency, is not necessarily cost effective, isn't practical for most conditions here in Canada. I say I'm not far from Toronto here. Well, we need it. It's great for the city. Take the bus. We spend a lot of money on public transportation every year to do just that, or use an e-scooter, which a lot of people are using. I'm not taking away from the idea that you should have that option, but you shouldn't get other people to pay for it. Worse, you shouldn't have a government try to shove it down your throat, as it were, and demanding that you drive this particular vehicle or that particular vehicle only because you will not be permitted to drive any other. And frankly, the economics of this, I'm in here in Ontario. You want to kill your number one sector, the automotive sector? This is the way to do it, because the Americans are no longer going to impose an EV mandate. They're not going to bring about the IRA. I hate the word, by the way, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's over. It's done. It's gone. Americans, who are 90% of the destination of all of our vehicles manufactured in Ontario, and to a lesser extent other parts of the country, will no longer be requiring electric vehicles because Americans are going to be forced to drive them. Why should Canadians accept that? Simply because it's cool, it's trendy. Look, people can't afford to make ends meet. They can't afford food at the end of the week. How the hell are they going to afford something that's both impractical, costly, and for many people, a major burden on our tax system?
That's a really great point about the United States because in looking at the Canada's website, the Department of Environment and Climate Change said that it would align with the US EPA rules. Well, now that the EPA has removed the stringent emission rules that promoted a shift to EVs, um, can we expect Canada to align with the EPA now? Or do you think the Carney government's going to double down?
Well, they can double down, but I think they'll do it at their own risk. They had to get rid of the carbon tax, which we fought for many years, going back to 2017, 2018, and demonstrated that once you hit a certain point, and that turned out to be 20 cents a liter, the public would push back. I mean, the Liberals basically, apart from the elbows up Trump nonsense, actually made inroads in terms of getting back their voter base by getting rid of that carbon tax. So I think the EV mandate is the next mistake they're making, apart from the clean fuel standard, the clean fuel regulation, which your colleague, my friend Ross McKittrick helped us write a report about in 2022. It's still there on the affordableenergy.ca site. It's LFX and Associates, in which we demonstrated that for every dollar of benefit that the second carbon tax, the clean fuel standard, the so-called regulation that's bringing out about an 8 cent a liter increase already in the price of fuel, diesel and gasoline, as companies are required to pay the carbon credits. What we're seeing, in fact, is a government that cannot ignore the reality that's in front of it, that people have had enough. They can't afford this nonsense and trendiness. And to use Justin Trudeau when he goes elected, because it's not 2015, it's 2025, and reality has really come to bite us.
Yeah, thanks so much for mentioning the energy reality of it all and the carbon tax 2.0, because a lot of people don't understand what the clean fuel standard is and how that's going to impact the fuel prices. And I mean, is this sort of like one of the sticks that if you keep adding these hidden taxes, some of them are hidden, others are not so hidden, onto the fuel costs, then that would nudge consumers into buying an EV instead of an internal combustion engine, which runs on fuel. So if you keep increasing the fuel price, then that would force Canadians to buy a vehicle that's way more expensive than an internal combustion engine. At least, that's kind of been the Norwegian model, is that they didn't have a forced mandate, but they just made it so expensive for anyone to purchase an internal combustion engine vehicle that they ended up buying an EV because there were all these other carrots for the EVs, but a stick for the ICE vehicles.
Well, I don't know of many people in Norway who have a large automotive sector that runs as number 2 or number 3 in the economy. But and I know if it was not ironically for the North Sea oil, Norway would be nowhere to be found economically. It wouldn't have the $2 trillion sovereign fund. But Canada is trading away an enviable position, not just its proximity to the United States, but the fact that it's number 1, like it or not, revenue generator is oil and gas. Second generator, of course, is steel manufacturing, agriculture, and farming and resources. So, like it or not, we are the world's go-to country when it comes to resources, and we have managed to manufacture a lot of that. But if we're willing to trade that away and try to pretend we can be trendy like Norway, then it suggests we also follow the advice of the Norwegians, which is in cold winters and in nights they ask you not to recharge your batteries because the grid can't help it. It's great to say you have great production. I mean, my old Rodney and Pickering was the first generator in North America. I always keep this whole thing, first nuclear generator in North America. You can have all the production you want, but if you can't get it to the end user, it's a little point. And the reality is that to electrify this nation would cost about $2.5 trillion. That's our full 100% GDP of our economy. It is not realistic. It is absurd. And no wonder Europe is walking away from it. No wonder the rest of the world is saying, forget it, including the United States and Asia. Well, hey, sure, you want to give us some stuff, that's great. But let's go back to batteries here. If we really want to have electric vehicles nice and cheap so that everybody can afford it without having to subsidize it, why are we imposing tariffs on Chinese-made EVs? The Chinese, 15 years ago, figured out they could not beat us on the internal combustion engine technologies and the advancements, so they decided to go a little bit of a different route, do the EVs. And of course, we all know that in China, you don't make EVs carbon neutral, and you certainly don't make it without massive pollution, both in terms of mining products, how it's mined, the environmental damage, the significant damage to labor codes in other parts of the world, using children to hand mine your cobalt. There's a whole host of not nasty things about this particular EV mandate that Canadians blissfully want to ignore, and the trendies want to continue to make sure that we don't understand. But when you force a car dealer to sell 1 in 5 vehicles on their car lots that have to be EVs, or pay a $20,000 fine for every unit they go over, you're asking for a backlash on a scale that I have not seen in a very long time. I remember in 1984 when the Liberals taxed insurance plans. I was campaigning on doors. Thousands of insurance agents came out and beat us hard in that election. In this next election, I can guarantee you every car salesman, every car dealer in this country, and they're not small, and every community in this country will be out fighting hard against the Liberals, their friends in the NDP, what's left of them, and of course the Bloc, who think that we can whimsically pretend to be trendy and have these things in a wave of a magic wand and one major mandate enforcement.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the automakers, because back in July, the CEOs from the 5 major automakers met with Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, and they warned that the EV mandate would, and I quote, inflict serious damage on the industry. And it'll affect the dealerships, the jobs, and if it's not repealed urgently. And I know that the federal government has put a lot of money into the sort of EV supply chain in Canada, which a lot of it seems to have ended up in companies that have gone bankrupt. And so if I'm wondering how this is going to hurt competitiveness amidst the US tariffs, and what these manufacturers, are they going to be encouraged to sort of forego their current manufacturing structure to export to the US, instead to develop an all EV Canadian supply chain to create these EVs for the Canadian market? Do you think Carney's going to listen to the automakers, or is he going to subsidize this kind of new manufacturing in Canada?
Well, if Carney ignores them, then it's an exercise in magical thinking that you can somehow, upend the world market and, have Canada blast its way with trendy little overglorified golf carts into the world. The Americans don't want them, and there's always a market for these things. But look, if the United States isn't going to do it, they're beating us hard on the issue of tariffs, and we have to respond. Apparently, we're not responding just yet. But if you want to see manufacturing leave Canada, especially related to the automotive sector and sectors that are connected with this, then by all means keep spending money towards things that people won't buy and can't afford and don't want. That is EVs. 6 months ago, I warned people the Bright Drop EV plant at Cami could not stay open. I went by, took a number of pictures, did a little video, and said, this plant has been shut down for 2 weeks. It was supposed to sell 100,000 units. It's only sold 2,000 units. And of those 2,000 units, they're a fire sale. Basically, anybody can pick them up. So when you see these things driving around, Bright Drop, EV 250s and 350s, I think is the number. Those are basically that's your money, or a corporation like GM's money being given to people to drive them around, because otherwise it's almost like, and I don't mean to disparage them, but it's like a bad smell. Nobody wants these things unless you actually give them money to drive them around. You want to give me free money, that's fine. But I think the economy has to have a very different polar shift change in terms of its attitude of governments can do everything and subsidize everything and be everything, because at the end of the day, it's leaving a lot of people a lot poorer off. And I think with respect to Canada's trade relationship, it's got to focus on what it does well. Ford, I'm here in Oakville, Ontario. Ford was supposed to build an EV at the Oakville plant. It's not doing that anymore. It's been building F-250, the big Super Duty. There's no kind of stuff. So talk about a slap in the face to the folks out there. And by the way, it isn't just the federal government, it's the provincial government. They committed a lot of money to this. I want to know where the hell the money's coming from when you're running massive debts that you now find are going to be even worse now that we're having to fight the tariffs.
Yeah, it's funny because Mark Carney told every department to cut 15% because, he's got to get the books under control and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking about all of the subsidies that have gone into the whole EV supply chain in Canada, whether it's the the manufacturing plants to assemble, or the batteries, or all of these different things. And I thought, wow, you could cut all those programs, all those subsidies, which have been like tens of billions, and you would save all this money that he thinks that every department ought to be saving. But in the end, I think because they're talking about, the federal government is talking about creating the subsidy for purchasing EVs once again in the lead up to the January beginning of the EV mandate. And like you said, I mean, there's a cost of living crisis in Canada. Even though the carbon tax is gone, there's lots of other things that are affecting the housing, the inability of people to find jobs that pay a decent amount. All of the, like, groceries. Whenever we go back to Canada and we go to the grocery store, we're always just floored at how much everything costs. And people, they're struggling. And to say that, well, they're going to hand out all this money so that you can buy $100,000 electric vehicle that's not going to work all the time, and will make it difficult for women, make it unsafe for women to be traveling. I think it's pretty terrible that this is what they're thinking about.
Well, the problem with net zero isn't just the EV mandates, it's that it's basically eclipsed the ability for the government to raise money by attracting investments into Canada to build pipelines, LNG, natural gas, oil, take your pick. I mean, 12 nations, including the one that he just saw, Germany came here a couple of years ago. Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, came over and said, listen, we're not here for your trendy, hydrogen. We're here
Yeah.
for your oil and gas. Can you please supply it? And of course, the Polish ambassador to Canada made it a complete mockery of the Liberal position of the past 10 years, which, by the way, Mark Carney is very heavily invested in, and in fact is part and parcel of the architecture of what we've seen over the past 10 years. Make no mistake about that. He's written about in his book, Values, where the Polish ambassador said, it's your natural gas going to the United States at a fraction of the price, and the Americans are liquefying it, going through liquefaction, sending it back to Europe and other parts of the world. Talk about drawers of water, hewers of wood, because we're the international Boy Scouts when it comes to climate and net zero. The fact is, now we should have had these pipelines built. All 17 projects should be up, not just one. And we should have more than just one pipeline built, not one that costs the Canadian consumer about $50 billion to build the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion that Kinder Morgan was prepared to build for nothing. I know because I fought the John Horgan government of the day, the NDP, who said they'd use every tool in the toolbox, pointed out the second carbon tax was costing consumers in British Columbia 20 cents a liter. They didn't want to listen. And yet we find ourselves in this position today where people can't afford to make ends meet. That is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for this generation, the next generation, and the ones after that who will have to pay for these very bad woke policies that have driven Canada into the ground.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was just reading an article in an extreme left-wing publication this morning, and they were saying that once again they're trotting out this argument that by the time that a natural gas pipeline is built to Eastern Canada and an LNG facility constructed, it'll be too late, because by that point, countries won't be using LNG anymore, or it'll be on its way out, and the prices are dropping because America's putting all this LNG onto the market, and so on. It's every excuse in the book to say why you can't do something. And and it's all those arguments is what led to it not being built 3 or 4 years ago, where it could have already been in construction and operation. Germany proved that you could build an LNG facility within, I think it was 8 months.
96 days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long to do that. Look, people can talk about this until they're blue in the face, but the reality is that there is nothing being done on the green side that isn't made without massive amounts of fossil fuels, of hydrocarbons. And so, like it or not, the world is still using as much as it did before. It's going to continue to do so as countries find more interesting ways to develop it. The question is, who do you want supplying that, and in what form? The best possible technology available to ensure that it does the minimal amount of harm, both to the environment, but also while respecting labor codes. Yeah, I've heard a lot from the Greens over the years saying this and that. most of what they say is just wishful thinking, hogwash. Because at the end of the day, it's costing. And you're in a country right now that knows all about it. I was in London 2 years ago, and the taxi picked me up, and he said he was driving. It was a green taxi. It was a
Yeah.
electric. And he said, "What do you think of it?" And the answer was rubbish. That's all he said. He said, "I can get 200 kilometers a day. I can't do my work." These
Yeah.
things are great in a certain circumstance and for a certain clientele. They cannot be imposed. And if they don't work in parts of Europe, they sure as hell won't work in cold Canada. But more importantly, can you imagine a combines operator having 8,000 acres in the middle of Saskatchewan? What do they have to do? Take their combine, plug it into somewhere in the middle of nowhere to a hydro line to try to find power to juice it back up? Look, that's not the way the world works, and it's not going to be the way of the future. What I hope Canadians realize is that once and for all, we have to be more practical in our policies. We have to be what Pierre Trudeau said, pragmatic approach. And that's not pragmatism. That's actually nihilism. It's a way of taking the country and sending it back to the dark ages, which I think a lot of these folks would like to do. Have us, living the state of nature, eating acorns, wearing animal skins, but no fires because of the carbon, because of our carbon footprint.
Exactly. And everything will be cold. We'll just be hunting. We won't even be hunting. If we're hunting, we're eating sushi or something. Um, you make a really good point there about how important infrastructure is. And, Canada's grid really isn't ready for mass EV adoption, especially in provinces like Alberta or even Ontario during peak demand. And I'm wondering, how could blackouts or charging shortages under this mandate what do you think that the impact it will have on average people? Will it curtail personal mobility? Will it turn a simple road trip into a logistical nightmare? What's your take on that?
Well, I bring it down to easy terms for you. Do you want to drive a battery operated jet to fly from one region of the country to the other? I don't think so. But if we're going to take the view that maybe we should have a better infrastructure, fine. How are you going to pay for it? I mean, in my province of Ontario, we're already running a $10 billion deficit every year as a result of the government shielding consumers and ratepayers from paying for green energy, which was implemented 15, 16 years ago by the previous Liberal government. It's nice to talk about to make sure that you keep the peace. You talk about battery storage and pumped energy, which you pump into a well, a big machine, and in the evening you pump it back, and you save money, or vice versa to save money. I suspect that what people are looking for is let the technology develop. Let these companies figure out a way to get around it. See, these are the goals, but they are not etched in stone. And I think that's the problem here. Someone is going to have to finally blow the whistle and say, the game is over. We have to now go back to the books and recognize what works and what doesn't work. And where Canada's been for the past 10 years has been a very crazy, weird experimentation, a little bit like the hippies of the 1960s going on a bad trip. I think there's been enormous damage, catastrophe in many respects to the Canadian economy. And I don't even get into the issue of migration or the housing crisis, but I know affordability had a lot to do. When you drive up the cost of energy and you drive out investments in our energy sector and other sectors, well, you wind up, Tammy, with a very significantly weak Canadian dollar. What does it mean? Well, I do my gas calculations every day, as I've done for the past 30 years. When it takes 139 Canadian pennies to buy a US dollar, that adds 24 cents a litre to the price of gasoline. Imagine what it does to the cost of food, because all of our commodities, lumber, electricity, everything is priced in US terms. So unless someone's got a magic wand they can wave and say, let's get rid of this, having a weak Canadian dollar is actually weakening the purchase power and the economic well-being of most Canadians. It's also sapping the government's ability to pay for the programs that Canadians expect. You want free dental care? Fine. Build another pipeline, because you can't afford to incur what could be, and I'm going to mark these words here right now on the Nemeth report, and that's critical people understand. We could be looking at $140 billion deficit in the next couple of weeks. That is going to be tectonic. It's going to shake the foundations of our woke idealism, and it's going to put us back to the part of the mid-90s where we came awfully close to being taken over by the IMF.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because there's talk that France and the UK within the next month or so could be forced to be taken over by the IMF like they did in the 1970s. And if Canada's going along a similar path, and Mark Carney's often jetting over to Europe to talk to Keir Starmer of the UK and Emmanuel Macron of France, is Canada headed, as you say, in a similar direction? But with respect to affordability, and you're the gas wizard, and you monitor the gas prices and fuel prices, supporters of the EV mandate would say, well, if you have an EV, you won't have to worry so much about the gas prices. It's just the electricity prices. And actually, it's cheaper to operate an EV than an internal combustion engine. What would be your response to that argument that EVs are cheaper to run?
No, I can tell you a replacement engine on a 200,000 kilometer Ford Explorer is probably about $7,000. An EV, try 40 grand. And even that, I can actually recycle that old engine. That old engine can go somewhere and be completely recycled, turned into something else. The EV battery, I can show you places here in Canada, around the world, where like windmill blades, they simply pile up and they don't know what the hell to do with them. More importantly, how are those things built? Your graphites, your polymers, the tires, they're all made with hydrocarbons. So let's not kid ourselves. The same folks that out there say that windmills are a lot cheaper than nuclear and other forms. So, don't take into account the amount of money that's required to build these things, the actual fluid, which is often oil that they have to use, the gear chambers, et cetera, to make them work. I think people who make those kind of statements, are, again, paid to hope that you and I don't push back on them. And I do push back on them very quickly when I see those kind of remarks, because they're full of hops. And I can tell you, as someone who's worked in the automotive sector, I work for a company, as I mentioned, Toyota Canada, that said many years ago, our future for the next 50 years is hybrid. How do I know that? I wrote the cut line back in 1992 when we brought the Tsunami out, which then became the Prius, the benchmark for the company. That company was number 5 in Canada then. It's number 1 today, not just in sales, but also in terms of exports. If Ontarians and Canadians want to be trendy, I can suggest losing $50,000 to $60,000 jobs in the automotive sector, because companies like Toyota and others are simply going to pull out if the EV mandates are successful, and they do impose the unnecessary, intolerable burden on consumers and on factories and on industry. Ontarians better find a better way to maybe open up new cottage industries in every street corner. It's called a food bank, because you're going to need them.
Wow. There was a Leger poll a few weeks ago where it asked Canadians about the EV mandate, and 71% said it needs to go, that they need to withdraw it. But Julie DeBruzen, who's the new Minister for Environment and Climate Change Canada, said the mandate's going to stay. So what would you say? What can Canadians do to persuade Prime Minister Mark Carney and his government to follow common sense and change direction?
Well, maybe elbows have to remain up because they can't reach for their wallets anymore. There's nothing left in them. And the minister, who I've known as a parliamentary secretary, isn't what I consider one of the sharpest tools in the shed, is simply going to follow orders as to what Mark Carney tells her. But the reality, I think, has become very, very clear, with all major manufacturers saying this doesn't work, with the ones that are there going bankrupt, and battery manufacturers now potentially facing lawsuits in the United States for false and misleading advice, has now led to a circumstance where they might be investigated by U.S. Authorities. I suspect that what is going to happen come September is that reality is going to hit hard. That government is going to put a pause on this. They have to. Otherwise, I can tell you that by January, there won't be a lot of there won't be a lot of car dealers working as well as they have over the past few months, knowing that only 4 to maybe 5% of their sales are EVs, where they can get them and where they want them. I mean, the government is probably going to come around and say, oh, it has to be based on availability. Doesn't matter how you couch this. It's a very bad policy. Very few countries want to impose this and at the same time impose a carbon tax, a clean fuel standard, an emissions regulation, a cap on emissions, green municipal funds, billions of dollars given out. We have accepted the gamut here in Canada. And the telltale in all this is the decline, our economic decline, in which people like Donald Trump are able to take advantage of our decline, our desperation, which was made out of this really unthought of and very not well thought out plan. As Jean Chrétien used to say, my old boss, before you go into a pool, you want to look before you leap. We didn't. We thought it'd be cool and trendy, and we forgot in the 1920s how this country and the world said no way to electric vehicles.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up the historical attempts to have electric vehicles. I remember going to the Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas. And in there they have Eisenhower's first car, which was this electric vehicle that looked like a horseless carriage with this massive battery in it. And
Yeah.
he used to trundle along in that vehicle until the internal combustion engine came along, which was way better, and he dumped that car and got a proper car. But what I find so interesting is that, as you point out, the technology isn't there yet to have these things. And once the technology's there, then it shouldn't need subsidies and mandates in order to make it so. People will just naturally uh, buy it because it's something better. And this is the entire net zero thing, where the spin is that wind and solar are better and cheaper, and if we have batteries it'll make it really good, and all this different kinds of stuff. But none of those things can exist without government subsidy, and if it was working really well you wouldn't have to mandate it. And it's like this whole policy shift is to swap one form of energy for another, but forcing it's not a natural transition. The previous transitions with energy in the past has been when there's been a better version has
Yes.
come around and replaced what was, something that wasn't as good. EVs aren't as good. And so it's like you want to force people to buy something that isn't good. It can't compete with the internal combustion engine on its own merits. It needs subsidies to do so, and they're very expensive. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course, if we were really interested in bringing these prices down, we'd simply take off the tariffs that we placed on Chinese vehicles. Look what it's doing in Europe. BYD is now eating Tesla's lunch because they provided a product that's a lot cheaper, however it's made. But if you want to be cool and trendy, suddenly the arguments about how great they are and the advantages they have goes out the window when you involve China. But I mean, if we accept China in all of our products at Canadian Tire or at Walmart or whatever the case may be, why aren't we doing it for vehicles? There's a market for EVs. I have no doubt in my mind. There are people who think that the best things is sliced bread. And as I've said before, over glorified, computer driven with the latest toys, golf carts. But I'm a tradesman. I have to drive 50 miles to go from here to Peterborough, Ontario, or I need something that's efficient, that is cost effective, that's practical. At 450,000 kilometers, I can replace the engine, the transmission with something that is reasonably affordable. If we don't start to accept practical reality that's in front of us, and that's as plain as the day is bright, then we're going to be led down this garden path, which isn't just about virtue signaling our climate creds. It's also about bankrupting the country. And I think Canada's teetering on that point right now for a lot of decisions that it made that were very bad decisions, and it may be too early, too late to reverse, whether that's LNG or whether it's building more pipelines. And Tammy, let me put this in perspective. If we had another pipeline with 1 million barrels going somewhere at $60 a day, that's $60 million times 365. That's several $1 billion in economic activity a year. The country definitely needs it. And if we don't find a way to do that, look, they're not coming to us for AI. They're not coming to us for hydrogen. They're not coming to us because we make great maple syrup. They're coming to us because we have something they don't have, energy, and it's done to the highest sense and the highest practical standards in the world. Whether you're in Quebec, it's hydro, whether you're in Ontario, it's nuclear, whether you happen to be in New Brunswick, which can be a combination of everything, or you happen to be Western Canada, where we've harnessed and developed natural gas to making it peaker power so that it's available, dispatchable the moment you need it, not waiting until the sun or the wind or other things take effect. My guess is that, or backing it up on batteries, for God's sakes, my guess is that Canadians, I think, are at that point right now. Mr. Carney was elected because he was able to say he could stand up to Donald Trump. He now has two problems. One, he can't stand up to Donald Trump. That's pretty clear. Second of all, he's going to have to reconcile. See, the Mark Carney we've known for the past 10, 15 years, going around trying to divest from oil and gas and causing potentially an antitrust claim against him in the next couple of months. Or is he going to be the pragmatist? Is he going to swallow himself whole, do a 180-degree turn and say, these are nice ideas, folks, but they don't work for modern society, and it's not the way ahead. I think that's the dilemma that Mr. Carney and his colleagues on the Green side are going to have to reconcile once and for all, because as it stands now, they're driving the Canadian and the world economy into oblivion.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I know I followed Mark Carney, what he's been saying with respect to net zero for a long time, and I was shocked at some of the stuff that he said since being elected at the end of April, because when he launched his climate plan during his leadership, he talked all about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, about redoing the industrial carbon tax to basically make up for the personal carbon tax that was removed for political reasons. So you're right. I don't know how he's going to reconcile these things, because if anybody reads his book or reads any of his reports and presentations that he's made when he was the leader of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and all of these other groups, he was fully committed to net zero. He was fully committed to going down this pathway. So you're right. I think this poses a very big dilemma for him and the Liberal Party about how do they let go of what's been happening over the past 10 years and maintain their commitment to the Paris Agreement and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to reconcile that, and it's an issue.
Well, if you're going to say the energy sector is great, we need to do more about it. I mean, that runs contrary to the very greenwashing bill that they brought out last year. It said you can't say good things about the energy sector, despite the fact there is, and despite the fact our entire standard of living in Canada is predicated on getting access to the resources that create the energy that make things affordable and make our country tick. Any Canadian who's in denial of that, I mean, needs to think they're, what they want is we want to live as Neanderthals and, in another century. The reality, I think, for many people here is that we need to finally wake up and smell the coffee. I mean, this is not 2015 anymore. It's 2025. The experiment failed. It failed miserably. And those who were part and parcel of its advocacy are going to have to come quick to the realization that deconstruction and backing away and backing our natural gas, our LNG, our pipelines, our oil and gas, our manufacturing, and yes, mining. Let's just do it. But mining doesn't happen without massive amounts of pollution and massive amounts of use of fossil fuels. So let's not be Pollyannish about this. Let's not try to be ignorant about the realities of what we're proposing here, because the alternative is, the question is, do we want Venezuela, Russia, do we want Iran producing these things, or do we want Canada? I think the answer is universally stability, political stability, geopolitics, and technology. Physics and our concern about everything else means that Canada should be a leader, not a laggard, and it certainly shouldn't be hostage to a rather hostile attempt by Greens and other climate organizations who get paid very, very well, and foundations who call themselves charities and they're not, coming out and trying to attack the very thing that is fundamentally important and indispensable for Canada's future. The sooner my old Liberal Party recognizes that, the sooner I think they'll be taken seriously. Otherwise, one way or another, they're headed for a political oblivion, like it or not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As we're kind of winding up here, I thank you so much for your time in chatting with me. For what would you recommend in a pinch for the audience? What can they do to push back on this?
Well, I think it's important that they talk to their car dealers. I think they ought to back our automotive sector, which has done very well in many communities, especially here in Ontario. And the idea that we can build all these plants with using small nuclear reactors, the province says they don't even have one yet. They haven't built it yet. So I think we need to take back the billions of dollars the federal government gives to green municipal funds so they can go around and say, turn off your natural gas plants. I suggest that people take a more practical approach to this and talk to their councillors, talk to their MPPs, and talk to their MPs and say, who is advising you on this bad idea of driving our economy and our world and our future into the ground? We need to change, or we're going to change you. I know about that. I lost in 2011. When the public makes up its mind and it's time for a change, it will effectuate that. I can give some advice to the current crop of Liberals. Stay in the path you're on, and you will be dead men and women walking. You will not survive the next election because people can't afford to be cool and trendy and to be distracted by, I don't know, COVID or climate or Orange Man bad south of the border. Sooner or later, they're going to wake up and smell the coffee. talk to young people. They know where it's at. They know they've been rooked by the Pied Pipers of net zero who've gone around selling us this idea of how bad we are and how great things can be. Nothing of the sort is truthful. So I think Canadians have within their ability to grasp, if you don't like how things are going right now, change it and make it abundantly clear to your municipal, federal, and provincial representative that their time is up if they don't change.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those last comments and for taking the time to speak with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. People, if you're listening, give us a shout out on X or whatever. Dan, where can people find you?
Yeah, affordableenergy.ca, president at affordableenergy.ca. You can pick me up a little bit on Twitter from time to time, have some fun with me, Dr. Nemeth, and that can always be I fear that's sort of open source in the public square, so you can have a bit of fun there. So Gas Price Wizard is my handle there. And of course, just president at affordableenergy.ca is the best. But look at what we're writing. Join some of the programs that we have. We have a petition there on EV mandates. We've already got 12,000 signatures we're ready to give to the opposition in the next few months. Obviously, there's only one party that says no to EV mandates because it sure as hell isn't to block the what's left of the NDP and the Liberals. So we're going to be giving this to the Conservatives in the new year. But look, this isn't about politics. This is really about getting in touch with us so that we can give you the best views on where the world is going and how we see the importance of affordable energy casting a very tall shadow on the future of this country.
That's fantastic. I'm going to put a description or links to all that in the description. But yes, please do check Dan out, Mr. Gas Price Wizard on X. You won't be disappointed. There's always something really interesting and witty going on his Twitter handle. So thank you again, Dan, and I thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
It's great to be here in the Nemeth Report. Thanks a lot, Tammy.
Thank you.